I see you said.
Okay, where do I recommend you find articles?
Yeah.
It's very easy. You can find articles from journals, from magazines.
Okay. Journals and magazines. Like
Yes.
on the CUNY website, the Medgar Evers Library.
Yes, you can actually just use Google and you type in, like a certain topic. Um,
Okay.
and generally, if you want to find scholarly articles, you type in a topic and then add PDF at the end of it. It will show you
Okay.
journal articles. Okay. For
Okay.
example, you can say the life and times of what do you call it? Was that big drug dealer that they got arrested in Mexico?
Al Pacino.
Al
Al
Chapo.
Al
El
I can't
Chapo.
even.
Chapo. El Chapo.
Yes.
El Chapo. Yes. And so if you say the life and times of El Chapo PDF, it will, pull up a lot of articles about El Chapo and, what he did. You can say the origins or the activities of the Medellin cartel. You can say the production of opium in the 15th century or the 19th century. And it will just show you articles.
So we're just presenting a summary of the article. You don't want to see the article itself.
No, but you have to give me the bibliographical reference to it.
Okay. Yes.
Okay,
Yes, I
because I will
understand
verify
that.
every article that you cite. I'll go on
Okay.
the internet and verify, believe me, I verify every one of them.
Okay.
Professor, is there a number of articles or sources that we should have? You did say 3 pages long, right?
Okay.
Seven topics.
Let me make very, very clear. Not 7
Thank you.
topics. Okay. Pick a narrow topic. Hello, Faustina, how are you? Hello, somebody called Faustina is online. Okay. All right. Now, pick a very narrow topic.
Mm-hmm.
One of them would be the poor classes and opium in England. That's an article. I mean, that's a topic. All right.
Right.
Now, find 7 articles on that
On that
topic.
topic. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. I
Find
got it.
7 articles on that topic, and then summarize each one of them in 1
Yes.
page.
Okay.
But the articles cannot be like a half-page newspaper article.
Okay.
The article that you read must be at least 3 pages long.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm talking about when I say 3 pages, I mean that the article that you read cannot just be some kind of op-ed on 1 column, half a page. No, it must be something that is 3 pages long, where somebody really did substantial work to, discuss a topic, discuss an issue, or write about something. And then after you summarize each of the 7 articles, then you have to write what is called an integrated summary.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that links these articles together? What's a common thread of idea, of a thesis, or something like that? And I'll give you an example, as you all read the documents. Let's think about the poor and opium in England in the 19th century, right? Or you can even say the poor and opium in England, all right? And so you will read that the poor abused opium in England to relieve stress. And, what kinds of stress? They smoked opium, they abused it because they were tired, It was during the, you know, industrial development in England, and sometimes they gave it to children, to babies, to keep them quiet. You can talk about, you know, how opium was distributed in England in the 19th century, okay, and how it came to England. You can talk about it was cultivated there. It was not just strictly imported. Now that's a topic there. How did it get to England? And somebody will say that somebody was importing them to England. You can say, can talk about class differences in the use of opium in England. And so, for example, the poor abused opium because they were exhausted from work, and that was a way to catch some sleep real quick. Nannies gave it to babies, but the rich and the wealthy may have used it because it was a painkiller. If you read through the literature, you will see that both cocaine and opium had perfectly legitimate uses from the past. Okay. And in fact, opium is still being cultivated legally. It's still being cultivated legally and used for medicinal purposes. When you go to the hospital and you get anesthesia, what is it they give you? Give you morphine.
Yeah.
Okay? They give you morphine. Morphine is made directly from opium.
Opium, yes.
That's what it is made for. Okay. So what you're seeing in the market, in the illegal market, actually is the surplus, or those who you know, just cultivated illegally for totally different purposes. But throughout the history of the human race, as far back as 3,000 years ago, opium was cultivated and used legally. And even then in the ancient world, Maimonides, the physician from about 1,200 years ago, or even Hippocrates from about 2,500 years ago, warned that opium is addictive. And the best opium in the world then was the opium cultivated in Thebes in Egypt, in ancient Egypt. It was the best opium that was cultivated. And they warned as far back as then that it was addictive, but it was also used as a painkiller way back then. And that is why the biological name for opium is Papaver somniferum. Okay, somniferum means that it gives sleep. Okay, that is the Latin expression. The Latin word for sleep is somnus, and the verb for sleeping is somno. Okay, somno, somnare, somnavi, somnatu. And somnare is the verb infinitive for sleep in Latin. Okay, and the same way the word to make, which is to make sleep, comes from feco ferrare, feci factum, which again, ferrare in Latin means to make, which is the verb infinitive. Okay, and so fecit is the past tense for it made. Okay, and so that's the way it's said in Latin: feci, fecit, fecitis, fecimus, and you can go through the declension, actually the conjugation. Okay, nouns are declined in Latin, verbs are conjugated in Latin. So now, but to make a long story short, that is how the ancient world called it Papaver somniferum. And papaver simply, again, is the Latin expression for poppy, because opium comes from a poppy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so this is a poppy that makes sleep. And so throughout the ancient world and even in the Middle Ages, but of course it was not, what do you call it, generally easily affordable, available, but even way back, like I'll give you an example. In the late Middle Ages, during the Battle of Agincourt, the Battle of Agincourt was fought in 1415 by King Henry of England against the French. And one of his noblemen caught an arrow in his head. And what they did was to feed this nobleman opium so as to get him to sleep so they could drill into his head and pull out the arrow shaft. So that's how far back opium was used as what do you call it, anesthesia to enable people to do what they have to do in terms of surgery. But then it wasn't generally available. I mean, it was expensive. You think about it, it was very expensive. But then the whole idea I'm trying to get to is that there were legitimate uses. The same thing comes from like cocaine, okay? Cocaine comes from the coca leaf, which was grown in North America and in South America. And the ancient Incas chewed on it to numb their cheeks and also to numb their stomachs. So they could walk for a very long time. Now, the Europeans came and, I mean, the ancient Incas, not only felt that, not only understood that it numbed their cheeks and what have you, it was also used recreationally just for that purpose, to numb their cheeks. And in fact, they also theorized, or you say in their legend, it was something they discovered through the gods, okay? And there are different stories, one being a princess who was murdered and who eventually sprouted from the soil as
Okay.
Another legend says that it was introduced to them by some god, okay? So there are different legends, and you can actually do a paper on the legend of the coca leaf among Native Americans.
Oh, okay.
That could be a paper. I mean, or that could be your, what do you call it? Annotated bibliography. And so you can do a paper on the legend of the coca leaf among Native Americans, and you're going to see 7 articles, telling you about different legends. And then you can tie it together by, by summarizing that this is legend, this is how the legend came, in religion, for religious purposes and or for social purposes, because the ancient Incas also used it for religious purposes. Okay, they use it for religious purposes, and was used in ceremonies. And I tell you a story about attitude towards superstition and things like that. I don't. Well, you guys are too young to know about Andy Griffith's show. Okay, it was like in the early 90s.
I've heard of, yeah. I watched Medlock.
Okay, okay,
I've seen
but you are too young to actually have seen the original shows. But there was this instance where Andy Taylor, the policeman or whoever, the sheriff, and B came back and said that their pastor was actually had a spiritual factor and the spirit had caught her and she was saying all kinds of things sort of induced by the spirit. And so I think it was Barney Five said, "Can I see, what did the pastor do for you?" So and B showed him this bottle with a liquid, and so apparently they drank it, and so Barney Five tasted the liquid and said, "Hey, wait a minute, this is really just like 100 proof alcohol." Okay, And so the ancient Incas would chew this coca leaf, and if they chewed a lot of it, then, they would say they're seeing the gods, and the gods are telling them this, or the gods are telling them that. So, and so the spiritual leaders used the coca leaf in many ways. But again, the Europeans came and discovered that when they paid the Incas with silver, they couldn't make sense out of it. Now, silver is very expensive and has always been expensive. And so when they discovered that the Incas will not accept silver for payment, they will accept the coca leaf, well, that was a godsend for them, because the coca leaf was cheaper. It was cultivated by the natives themselves. And so the Europeans began to pay them with coca leaves, which made them work longer and harder, which was good for profits. And so that was some form of exploitation that the Europeans introduced, but they also then fed it to African slaves, because the African slaves would work longer and harder without being hungry. And so that made things easy on both sides. And so, of course, when slavery was over, they discovered in the 19th century that, they extracted the cocaine out of coca and then began to make medicine out of it. Okay. Medicines like codeine are based on cocaine, if you want to know that. And also the cocaine in the coca leaf that they extracted was also intoxicating. And so they began to add it to drink. And so a chemist in Georgia combined the coca leaf with the West African kola nut. West African kola nut is a nut that contains loads of caffeine. If you are not used to it and you chew just one nut, about, I don't know, the size of a small plum, if you chew one of it, you won't sleep. It will keep you awake. I remember when we were in high school, people that didn't like to drink coffee would cola nut, and that's it. And you would study until 1 a.m. You wouldn't sleep, but it could make you nervous if you're not used to it. Make you nervous, and it could keep you awake for a long time. In any event, the chemists in Georgia combined the cocaine and the cola nut, and hence you have Coca-Cola. But that happened when initially they extracted the cocaine and put it into wine, and it was causing people to be intoxicated. People liked it. People liked it a lot, it just gave them a high. But it was causing a lot of problems, people getting addicted to it. People complained that it should be banished, so on and so on, especially during prohibition. And the government wasn't listening, but you know what happens when business people are making profit and they try to banish something that they're making profit from. What happens? They have their lobbyists to make it very difficult. So the lobbyists made it very difficult to pass any legislation to abolish cocaine in wines. And so during Prohibition, then there was this propaganda that Black men would drink these wines spiked with cocaine, and they were raping white women. And so the government then abolished spiking wine with cocaine. And so this is when the chemists in Georgia sort of processed the cocaine in such a way that the intoxicating ingredient in it was taken out, and then combined it with cola nut, the extract of cola nut, to make Coca-Cola. Which, of course, you know, is not intoxicating, but you have to add loads of sugar to it for it to be tasty. And so, because they created effervescence, and that's the story of Coca-Cola. Again, some of you, practically everybody here is too young to know that Coca-Cola did not register its patent until today. It's hidden in the vault. And another chemist then, as usual, did experiments and found out what was in it, what was in the original Coca-Cola, and then made Pepsi-Cola. And there was a lot of competition. And so, what do you call it? Coca-Cola was approached by Pepsi-Cola, by the maker of Pepsi-Cola, and said, if you give me $3,000, I will leave the market for you. And Coca-Cola said, no, I'm going to compete you out of the market. I'm going to force you out of the market through competition. Well, the rest of it is very long. It's not history. Pepsi-Cola is still there, and Coca-Cola is still there. And so, fast forward to 1980. It reminds me of a certain fairy tale or legend in African folklore. The mosquito is said to have approached the ear and said, I want to marry you. And the ear said, I'm not going to marry you because you're too fragile. You're going to die, and I'm not going to have a husband. And so this is why the mosquito will come and buzz your ears. I'm still alive. And so from 1860s to the 1980s, Pepsi-Cola was still alive. So Coca-Cola should have bought them out with $3,000. So in 1980, what happened was Coca-Cola decided that they were still going to force Pepsi-Cola out of the market. And Pepsi-Cola redesigned or remixed their Coca-Cola to taste like Pepsi-Cola so they could drive Pepsi-Cola out of the market finally. And it was a disaster. And 6 months later, they went back to the original formula. And hence, when you see a can of Coca-Cola, you see where they say Coca-Cola Classic.
Mm-hmm.
That was the origin of it. So, to make a long story short, Pepsi-Cola is still buzzing Coca-Cola's ears and it's still alive. But that should give an idea of the story of these two apparently illegal drugs. There was a time when they had legitimate uses over time. Okay, and so now coming to the whole purpose of this course, the way I designed it, is to give you an objective history, but also the economic factors that actually explain the war on drugs and why it is like a perpetual war. It's a war that really you can never win by totally abolishing drugs. You just cannot win it. People make profit out of it. That's the economics of it. And people have made profit out of it way back in the past, one way or another. For example, there was a time when the British and the Dutch made huge profits exporting opium to the Chinese. And so the Chinese didn't like it because it was destroying their population. It was weakening their population, and they prohibited it. And so the British declared war on China, accusing them of obstructing trade. They were, say this is all about trade, but the Chinese says this trade is destroying our people, and they made war on China, of course defeated China, and forced the Chinese people to be importing opium. Okay. And then over time, the communities in England and in Holland, Western Europe, began to say, but you cannot be making profit out of this thing that also kills people, because they say what goes around comes around. And so Europeans began to also use opium, but they were using it for medicinal purposes. And then some people were using it for recreational purposes, especially the celebrities and the rich and the wealthy and what have you. And the governments were importing this product and not only making profit out of it, but also raising a lot of taxes out of it. And so the societies, the communities in England, in Holland, and their neighbors began to protest and say, government cannot be raising revenue from something that's killing a lot of people. I mean, they were forcing the Chinese to buy it. So now it came back to them. So this is the origin of the war on drugs in the United States and in England, but it began in England. And in the United States, also, when young people began to use it, and it was creating problems, parents protested and saying, the youth are being destroyed by the use of these illegal substances. And so that is really the origin of the war on drugs in the United States. That is the modern war on drugs. Remember, there was prohibition in the 1920s, but the prohibition was on alcohol and, of course, on cocaine and morphine and all of that, because they were addictive, and they are still addictive. They're still the same thing. Now, the other thing that I would like for the class to really pay attention to is reading the documents and also applying them and how to answer questions. You can see in the early part of this, like last week, we talked about ideological approaches to drugs, to the drug war, okay? We call them analytical perspectives. And those analytical perspectives are based on philosophy and ideology. And so we looked at the deviance theory approach, we look at the rational approach, but I also introduced the approach of historical materialism. And so let me just make very, very clear the differences. Now, the deviance approach is a sociological concept that every society has norms of behavior. Every community has norms of behavior. And there are some people who will deviate from those norms. And those people are called deviants. And the people that use drugs are deviant people. People who try to escape, people who are irresponsible, and one thing they do is to do drugs. So that's like the deviance ideology. Then there's the rational ideology, which simply says that people do things that they consider will solve their problems. A rational reason why people do things. And what is rationality? And I'll give you my own definition of rationality. Behavior that is consistent with a desired outcome is rational. Okay. For example, there was once in the news, somebody had jumped from an 8-story building head first and died. And so the news media were interviewing the neighbors and said, look at what this guy did. You know what, if something was bothering him, and somebody comes and says, honestly speaking, that was irrational behavior. And theoretically, my attitude is there was nothing irrational about it. He wanted to die. Suppose he stabbed himself on the hand or in the finger, that wouldn't be rational because you stab yourself in the finger, you're not going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Off of a roof, head first. Okay. So the idea behind rational theory is that people who use drugs use them because it gives them a high and they enjoy it, or because they have problems they want to get away from temporarily. And so they drink, they do opium, they do cocaine. And so there is a benefit to them. But somebody who wants to like focus on their job and they don't want to miss work and what have you, they will not use it. Okay? Somebody who doesn't have problems that they want to forget for a moment, they will not use it. So in that sense, the idea then is if somebody says, I want to be a productive citizen, the rational theorists will say, educate them to get them to understand that if you keep doing this thing, you will not be successful, or it will cause you harm, cause you, to go crazy after if you use it for a long time. It will cause you to have palpitations and you're going to be unhealthy in some other way. And so if you educate people, they can see the rationality in not using it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But deviants will simply say, I mean, they ought to understand the harm that this thing does. And therefore, if they do it, that means they are devious people.
Right.
Again, I'm not subscribing to any of them. I just need for you to understand how different people look at uh, uh, this phenomenon. Now, historical materialists, their foundation for theory is Marxist theory, or Marxism, or Marxism coming from the theories of Karl Marx. And what historical materialism essentially says that over time, in any society or throughout the human history, there are people who are exploiters, there are people who are exploited. The exploiters are the ruling class and the exploited are the working class. And the ruling class, whether you're looking at primitive exploitation or, modern capitalism, they kind of like monopolize the capital and instruments of production and distribution. And when you have a class of people who are monopolizing the instruments of production and distribution, what happens is that the working class does all the production, and since the ruling classes control distribution and instruments of production, they appropriate a lot of the surplus to themselves. And they become very rich, they become very comfortable, and the working class suffers because the working class is alienated from the production system, and out of their frustration, they're doing drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's up to you to actually see whether or not you agree with that, because after all, Richard Pryor was doing drugs. Whitney Houston,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
the children, her natural children. And so what's their problem? Are they working class?
Nope. They're rich.
Very rich.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is the explanation for them getting addicted?
Mhm.
It
I
could,
sure.
could be explained through rational theory. Use them a high. Or it could be explained through some kind of frustration. When you come to look at some of these celebrities, you have a lot of people that hang around them who really, uh, make a lot of money off of it. And I'll give you a good example. Somebody like Elvis Presley, okay? None of you are too young to see Elvis Presley in his prime and to see, like, he died at the age of 42 and he got into drug use. And to some extent, he was almost going broke because you have all these producers, managers, agents who were really just like milking a good deal of the money from him. And in order to sustain himself, he had to be constantly on the road. When he was tired, when he was not feeling well, because he needed to be making that money to be paying them. And I see him because I was still just give me a minute. I saw Elvis in his prime in the 1960s, in the 1970s, and when he eventually died, to see him during the last couple of years, he was really bloated, and more like saw him, he was like he was dazed as a person, and so maybe he was frustrated, and he was doing what he was doing. Okay, and so you think about you wouldn't know this guy, Red Fox. You know, you may have seen him since the reruns. Sanford and Sons. I don't know if you ever saw Sanford and Son, the rerun. Okay, and the main actor, the main character of Sanford and Sons was called Red Fox. And Red Fox was so broke that somebody had to pay for his funeral. Oh. And I remember when he was being interviewed and they asked him, what happened to your money? He said he mostly gave it away. He mostly gave it away. And, so that could be an explanation. But what I need for you to understand is I ask questions in the exams and I say, how would you apply the rational theory to this particular situation? And what students do is they go on the internet, they download something that really tells a very long story, and they paste it. And I can see very clearly you did not read the material. If I say, how can you apply rational theory to this? I want you first of all to define rational theory. And so how can you then apply that concept, that definition of rational theory to this question? Or how can you use the theories of power, okay? And so when we meet next week, we're not gonna meet on Thursday next week because, well, after Thursday next week, your exam will be on the following Tuesday. So we could meet on Thursday. And I'm going to go through the other theoretical concepts that you will need to apply. For example, the difference between supply side and demand side approaches to war on drugs, but also other concepts like theories of power. There are at least two theories of power that you need to understand. And I think it's already there in your readings, but I'm going to elaborate on that. One is realistic theory of power, okay? Realistic theory or, realism is really, looking at the way things are. Realism, for example, poses that in any kind of interaction between two groups, there's a struggle for domination. There's a struggle for domination, and the realistic theory simply says that in any kind of interaction, that there's a zero-sum game. Your gain is my loss. My loss is your gain, because there is this struggle for competition, for dominance. And so the concept of cooperation never works, okay? And so if you think about the reason why the British made war on the Chinese is based on the realistic theory of power, because the British had the military might, they had the military equipment, they had military superiority, they had technological superiority. And so it made sense for them because of the profits they were making from selling opium in China. They made war on China. That's realism. What if the Chinese were able to beat them back? What would they do? They'll be forced either to stop trading the opium to the Chinese, or they will negotiate. They will negotiate. Okay. Let's talk about America. When Europeans came on the shores of the Americas, if the Native Americans had guns and gunpowder, there's no way the Europeans would dominate this country today. The Native Americans would simply shoot them out from the shores. And if they wanted to come in and settle, they would negotiate. And you might find out that every president of America would have been a Native American, because they would say, if you want to come, then we have to control the politics. You can participate wherever we allow you to participate. They will negotiate. But because they had guns and gunpowder, they had chain mail, even before guns and gunpowder became so prevalent. They had chain mail, they had swords, and they had, you know, bows and arrows that could pierce through metal. And Europeans have had that for centuries. Native Americans didn't have it. They essentially fought half naked. And Europeans, you know, had, if you think about the history of war, the longbow. I don't know if you've heard about the longbow. Okay, way back, I mean, like 3 centuries before they came to America, the longbow, you know, was already in use in warfare in Europe. And you can shoot those longbows from 100 yards away. That's a whole football field length, and it will pierce through metal armor. Okay, will pierce through anything. Okay, I mean, unless you had a shield, but a thick shield, and then by the time it goes through the shield, you will not be able to have the force to come into armor. But if it hits your armor straight, like the chainmail that Europeans wore in warfare, it will pierce through it. Europeans had it. And so if they came to America and the Native Americans didn't have any of that, which they did not have, they were able to, you know, take over the country. That is what realism is about. It's about who has more force, who has the power to overcome the other person. Well, rational theorists would rather, liberalism would rather argue that cooperation is better than force. Because if we cooperate, we're going to be more productive than if we do not cooperate. I don't know why human beings are not thinking like that. And Putin is invading Ukraine, and America is invading Afghanistan and Vietnam and whoever they can invade. Because essentially, they're applying the realistic theory of power. Okay, so again, if I ask you a question in an exam and I say, how will you apply the realistic theory of power to this particular question? First of all, I want to know that you understand what realism is about. What is the realistic theory of power? And so why does it apply to this situation? Rather than just go to the internet, copy something that does not really quite answer the question. And
Professor, how many time we have for the exam?
You say what?
How many time we have for the exam?
I mean,
1
how long
hour?
is the exam? How much time?
Yeah.
Okay. You would have about 2.5 hours.
2.5. Okay.
And it's all written. There's no multiple choice.
Okay.
This is why I say when I ask you a question, you know, and I refer to a theory, you have to first of all define that theory to show that you understand it. And then show how it applies in a particular situation. Right?
Okay.
All right. So, I mean, essentially that is, you know, what I have for you today. And next time I'm going to, you know, talk about approaches to the war on drugs, so that you know, I want to get good answers to the questions. I want to be sure that you actually read the material
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. So do you have any questions for me?
No, you said we're not meeting next Thursday, but the Thursday after?
No, 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 no. I mean, your exam, okay, we're going to meet next Thursday.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to meet next Thursday because your exam comes the following Tuesday.
Tuesday. Okay.
Oh, the following Tuesday. Wow.
Yes, because
Yeah, the
just
classes.
the,
So,
the following
Professor,
Tuesday is the 24th, I think.
Professor, you said
Yeah.
it's one page per article.
Yes,
The
okay.
summaries.
You summarize each article in one page. There must be 7 of them.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
You summarize each article in one page. Before you summarize an article, you must write the bibliographical citation of that article.
Okay.
Okay, and summarize what it is saying. Now, at the end of your 7, after doing your 7 summaries, then
So we
you
should get 7 pages.
You
7 pages.
Yes, in 7, that's 7 pages. Then you write an
Okay.
integrative summary. Think about it. You have to write an integrative summary that ties them together.
Okay.
Okay.
And that's gonna come
Okay, I'll
before.
come to you. You write an integrative summary that ties everything together, usually about 2 or 3 pages long.
Okay.
Okay. And then finally, of course, you must have a cover page. And then finally, you must list all 7 articles in a final page.
Okay.
Okay, somebody was raising their hand. Go ahead.
I think it was me, but I forgot what question I had.
I'm sorry. I
That's
just wanted
okay.
to make sure that everybody followed me. Yeah.
Yes, we got you clearly.
Okay. So any other question? All right. Okay. So thank you all for coming by. So I will post another announcement next week, and we're going to talk more about the topics that we have read about. So I'll see you all next week.
Okay, goodbye.
Good night.
Enjoy your
Good night,
evening.
Professor.
All
Good
right.
night.
Goodbye.